You're listening to Boring History for Sleep, how a medieval house kept warm without a chimney. A slow, sleepy journey into the chilly corners of the past, where drafty walls and smoky ceilings were just part of surviving the night. Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping into the frigid world of medieval homestone walls, smoky air, and bone-deep chill that seeps into your soul like a ghost with an attitude problem. You're standing outside a typical English cottage, maybe 1300 or so. It's dusk, and the wind has that damp, mean bite that feels like it's actively judging your life choices. The door creaks open, and you duck inside because yes, the ceiling is low enough to guarantee at least one skull bruise before bedtime. Inside, dark, smoky, and earthy. The air smells like wet dog, cabbage, and something you hope is just moss. There's no fireplace, no chimney, and certainly no central heating. Just a bare hearth on a dirt floor, with a faint flicker of light and an even fainter promise of warmth. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least you'll go out. Historically accurate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere particularly chilly or weirdly warm, drop your location and local time in the comments now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you trudge across the uneven floor, stepping over a sleepy chicken. Yes, inside. Chickens and pigs and even the occasional goat shared the living space with humans, not because people were lonely but because every ounce of body heat mattered. Welcome to the pre-chimney survival strategy, living like a glorified barn animal. The walls are made of wattle and daba, medieval combo meal of mud, straw, and sticks smoothed over a timber frame. It's sturdy enough to keep out wolves. Insulation, not so much. You can feel the night wind sliding its fingers through the gaps, tickling your ankles like a ghost with a grudge. And the ceiling, that's a blackened canvas of old smoke stains, spider webs, and the occasional blinking pair of eyes. Don't worry, it's just a cat, probably. Ceilings back then were low, not for coziness, but because the heat, what little there was, had to stay trapped near the ground. And every extra foot of headroom was a luxury nobody could afford. You crouch near the hearth. It's not a fireplace, not really. Just a shallow pit in the middle of the floor, maybe ringed with stones, if you're lucky. A fire smolders there, coughing up more smoke than heat. There's no chimney to usher the smoke outside, just a hole in the roof if someone remembered to poke one. Otherwise, the smoke simply fills the room, rising to the rafters and curling around your lungs like an unwanted cuddle. Historians still argue whether the smoke was an intentional pest deterrent or just something people put up with. One school of thought says the smoke helped preserve the thatch roof, hardening it against rot and insects. Another says it was the medieval version of, "We haven't invented a better idea yet. Please, stop asking." And yet, this place is warm, kind of. Not take your socks off warm, but at least your eyebrows aren't freezing warm. The fire gives off just enough heat to stop you from dying of exposure. The animals, despite their questionable hygiene, provide warmth in the way a hot potato might. Gross, but effective. Someone hands you a bowl of pottage, basically vegetable stew, with whatever the pig didn't eat. It's hot, and in this context, that's as good as gold. You clutch it with both hands, savoring the radiant heat like it's a personal miracle. A fringe theory suggests that eating warm meals actually became culturally important, not just for nutrition, but as one of the few ways to experience heat in winter. As the fire crackles and the shadows dance along the walls, you notice something peculiar. There's no real furniture, just benches, maybe a crude table, and straw-stuffed mattresses on wooden frames or right on the floor. The concept of comfort here is less about softness and more about not freezing to death in your sleep. You huddle near a woolen blanket, scratchy but thick. Wool was the thermal MVP of the Middle Ages. and folks layered it like modern hikers in the Alps. No one undressed for bed unless they were trying to get pneumonia on purpose. A bit of warmth radiates from the fire, but it's quickly lost to the stone and drafty walls. So people relied on something else: habit. You adapt. You learn to live with the cold. Maybe you don't even notice it after a while, or maybe that's the hypothermia talking. You glance up again at the ceiling. Remember, no chimney. The smoke has nowhere to go, and your eyes are beginning to sting. But it's not just the air quality that's dangerous, it's the fire itself. Every year, homes burned down from stray sparks and unattended coals. Yet people kept using open hearths for centuries, because the alternative was, well, colder. Fun fact: some villages banned nighttime fires entirely, with officials walking door to door announcing the cover fire command couvre-feu in French. Yep, that's where the word curfew comes from. Not a bedtime for teens, just a way to stop houses from going up in flames while folks snored. You lie back against a pile of straw and damp wool, listening to the wind whistle through the slats, the pigs snoring softly beside you, and the fire crackling in its smoky pit. It's not paradise, but somehow, against the odds, people survived like this for centuries. And as you close your eyes, your breath fogs in front of your face. Cold, constant, ever present, but you're not alone. And that's what made all the difference in these chimney-less nights of medieval life. You wake up sort of. It's hard to tell what time it is in a medieval house. The light slipping in through the crooked shutter gaps is murky at best, barely enough to silhouette the chickens still roosting on the wooden beam overhead. Your breath, visible in the cold air, greets you like an unwelcome fog. You didn't really sleep so much as drift in and out of shivering consciousness, wrapped in every piece of fabric you own. This is where the second secret of medieval warmth kicks in: body heat. That glorious, sweaty, cramped, oh so uncomfortable necessity. You are not sleeping alone, not because you're loved, but because you're cold. Your siblings, your parents, maybe your cousin from 2 villages over, and yes, even that pig again, are all huddled together in a single bed, if you're lucky. Or more likely, just on a pile of straw. You shift slightly and feel someone's foot, not yours, under your knee. It's hard to tell if it's your brother or the family dog. The dog's body is curled in the crook of your legs, generating more heat than anyone else in the room. Dogs, cats, and even geese were practically living hot water bottles. Some old texts even recommend placing a dog at your feet for maximum warmth efficiency. No, seriously, that's how specific things got. It's crowded, it's itchy, and it smells like socks and livestock, but it works. Human bodies throw off heat, and when you pack them close enough, you create a kind of medieval the moisture, cleanliness, or fun. One 14th century proverb even warned, better to share a bed with kin than freeze alone with pride. Historians still argue whether this practice was rooted more in necessity or culture. Were big family beds just a practical solution to heating problems, or did they also reflect a communal attitude toward privacy, which, frankly, didn't exist yet? Privacy, as we know it, is a modern invention. These folks were more concerned about frostbite than personal space. The actual sleeping arrangement varies depending on your status. If you're a peasant, you're on the ground floor, curled up on straw or a wooden platform. If you're marginally wealthier, maybe you're in a curtained bed in the corner, though that's more for dignity than insulation. The curtains trapped a bit of heat, sure, but they mostly kept the dog from licking your face mid-snooze. Bedding wasn't the plush affair we think of today. Feathers were for the rich, and even then, those beds could be cold without external help. Most common folks used straw or hay, occasionally mixed with lavender or rosemary knot, for fragrance. But to keep bugs away, it helped a little, kind of, maybe. You get up, teeth chattering, and begin your morning routine, which consists of not stepping in something unpleasant on the floor. The animals are up too, some inside, some just barely outside. Keeping animals indoors wasn't a quirky decision, it was practical. Their heat raised the ambient temperature of the room a few crucial degrees. In fact, some Scandinavian homes were specifically designed with stables built directly underneath or next to the living area. The animals were, quite literally, the furnace. There's a certain rhythm to these mornings. Wake up cold, stumble around, try to find something warm to hold on to, usually porridge, or each other. Clothing doesn't come off. Not at night, and definitely not now. You simply layer more. Linen shirt, wool tunic, maybe another wool tunic, socks if you're lucky, and a cloak if you need to head outside. No one strips down to sleep unless they enjoy suffering or have a death wish. You wrap your cloak tighter and sit near the now dead hearth, trying to relight the fire. Flint, steel, dry grass. You blow gently, and the embers blink awake like lazy eyes. It's a slow process there. Are no matches, no gas starters? If you're clever, you buried a few coals in ash last night, hoping they'd survive until morning. If not, well, it's going to be a long, cold wait for breakfast. As the fire sputters to life, so does the house. The air is still freezing, but there's a kind of noisy coziness as people shuffle around, pour sludgy ale or thick goat's milk, and start poking at pots and pans. The heat from the fire doesn't reach far, but it draws everyone in like moths to a promise. Even the pig scoots closer. You notice how close everyone stays to each other, not just from affection, but from strategy. The house's warmth is communal now. One hoards it, and the idea of personal space still hasn't evolved. People shared not only beds but tasks, clothes, even thoughts in a way that feels bizarrely intimate now. And there's something else, a small, almost imperceptible sound, people humming. Whether it's a lullaby or just tuneless mumbling, it's another way to stay warm, singing, talking, moving, staying awake and alive. There's a reason so many folk tales and oral histories were told around the fire. Stories generate warmth of a different kind in these stone and timber boxes of cold. A good tale was as necessary as kindling. One of the stranger traditions you hear whispered in this house involves something called a warming stone. It's a flat rock, heated in the fire and wrapped in cloth, then tucked under blankets or inside beds to keep toes from turning into medieval popsicles. Some families even pass down special stones, like heirlooms. Imagine getting a rock in your inheritance and being grateful as the day begins. You prepare to head outside for chores, already dreading the cold and missing the pig. But you pause and look back at the huddle, the tangle of limbs, cloaks, and quiet snoring. For all its filth and discomfort, the togetherness here isn't just logistical, it's survival. And strangely, even in this freezing, smoky room where your toes are still numb and your eyes burn from the ash, you feel its warmth, not from the fire, from the breathing, snorting, half-awake pile of humanity you just crawled out of. You're outside now, and immediately regret it. The wind slaps your face like a disgruntled baker and goes right through your layered wool, as if to say, nice try. But you're on a mission to gather more firewood, maybe a bit of kindling, and if you're lucky, something dry enough not to hiss like a cat when you toss it into the hearth. You clomp through the frozen mud, every step a sticky squelch, as smoke drifts lazily from other homes where hearths have also begun to stir. As you approach your house again, let's pause and talk about that hearthicore of medieval warmth. It's time to really examine what a chimneyless heating setup looks like in full smoky glory. Back inside, the fire you managed to rekindle earlier is now spitting embers and a modest bit of heat. There's no chimney, so all that glorious warmth comes at the cost of breathing in enough smoke to age your lungs 50 years by supper. Your eyes sting, and your nose runs. You haven't cried, but you look like you've just seen a tragic ballad about a knight and his duck. The open hearth is situated in the middle of the room, often directly under a hole in the ceiling. This smoke hole is more a suggestion than a solution. When the wind is right, it lets some of the smoke out. When the wind is wrong, which is most of the time, it just throws the smoke back at you like an offended ghost. Historians still argue whether medieval folks were bothered by this. Did they simply acclimate? Did they value the smoke's side benefits more than they disliked the coughing fits? One theory suggests the smoke helped cure meats and deter pests. Another insists it served as a spiritual barrier. Smoke, after all, was believed to drive away evil spirits. And as a bonus, smoke-drenched thatch was less appetizing to rodents. Though it also meant the ceiling dripped soot during rainstorms. You sit near the hearth and poke at the flames with a stick that's only slightly on fire. The hearth is multifunctional. It's where you cook, boil water, brew ale, and dry your damp wool socks that may or may not ever be truly dry again. It's also the social hub of the house. Everyone sits around it, not just for warmth, but for visibility. Remember, there are no overhead lights. If you want to read, sew, mend, or just not stub your toe on a sleeping goat, you stay near the fire. The design is deceptively simple, a few stones ringed in a circle or square, with maybe an iron trivet or spit if you're high-tech above it. There might be a wooden hood to catch some of the smoke and funnel it, somewhere. Not efficiently. These were more about preventing your ceiling from catching fire than anything else. And that ceiling, you notice it's blackened with soot and rich, swirling layers, centuries of dinners, winters, and bedtime stories fossilized in ash. The upper beams are coated with it, a patchwork of shadow and charcoal. In fact, there's a term for this look, the smoke loft. It's where the soot settled, where meat hung to dry, and where birds sometimes nested, if they were especially bold or very confused. You cough again, and someone hands you a cloth to tie around your face. This is your medieval air filter. It's a damp rag you breathe through, so you don't wake up with lungs that feel like overcooked sausage. Effective. Not really. Symbolic. Absolutely. You squint through the haze and catch your reflection in a pewter spoon. You look like a raccoon that tried to steal fire. Welcome to chimney-free life. There are benefits, if you squint hard enough. The smoke keeps things dry. In a world of constant dampness, a little soot might be the difference between preservation and rot. Plus, the fire's centralized location distributes heat as evenly as possible, meaning everyone gets a little warm instead of one person hogging it. But let's be real, it's still miserable. You're constantly balancing the need for heat with the desire to, breathe. And fire maintenance is a full-time job. It requires attention, kindling, and a healthy sense of dread. Too much smoke, and you pass out. Too little fire, and you freeze. It's a medieval Goldilocks situation with much higher stakes. Fun tidbit. Some homes had smoke bays, tiny second floors or attic nooks where smoke could collect before escaping or not. These spaces were eventually converted into bedrooms, which sounds cozy until you remember that sleeping in the attic meant marinating in carbon particles like a holiday ham. You peer up through the smoke hole and catch a glimpse of the sky gray, maybe snowing soon. The hole is framed with rough wood, charred at the edges, and you notice an old iron pot hanging just below it. A family relic, blackened from decades of stew, porridge, and someone's questionable turnip experiment. Cooking over the hearth is an art form. No knobs, no timers, just instincts, guesswork, and burns. Many burns. Even the positioning around the hearth has a social order. Elders and important guests get the warmest spots. Children get pushed to the edges not because they're less loved, but because they bounce back from cold faster. Supposedly. You, however, are planted somewhere in the middle. Not cold, not privileged. Just smoky. As the flames snap and crackle, a story begins. Someone's grandmother murmurs a tale of fire spirits, protectors of the hearth, who dance in the flames and keep the warmth alive. Superstition. perhaps. Or maybe just a way to explain why people talked to their fires when alone. You stare into the flames a little longer. The hearth is choking you. It's warming you. It's everything. Without it, the house is just a damp box filled with angry poultry and bad dreams. With it, it's a smoky sanctuary, not perfect, but it's home. You're crouched by the hearth again, the smoke curling like a snake around your shoulders. Your clothes smell like roast pork, but no pork has been cooked in days. The soot is baked into the very fibers of your tunic, and it's hard to tell where the fire stops and your breath begins. Still, you're grateful for it, because once you step away from the fire, the house reverts to what it truly is, a barely contained outdoor experience. And that brings us to the roof. You tilt your head back and gaze upward carefully, because if you look too fast, you might inhale a cobweb or startle the cat napping on a beam. The ceiling is patched and sagging in places, stuffed here and there with moss, straw, and a prayer. Medieval roofing was less home improvement and more slow-motion crisis control. The go-to materials: thatch, turf, sticks, and occasionally, dried animal dung. You know, nature's insulation. Allegedly, thatched roofs, especially, were a medieval staple. Bundles of straw, layered thickly over beams and tied down with rope or wooden pegs. It sounds rustic, and it was. It was also flammable, leaky, itchy, and highly attractive to insects and birds. There's a reason villagers sometimes carried sticks indoors, not just to walk, but to prod birds out of the rafters. One monk's diary from the 12th century even records a battle with a particularly territorial crow that had claimed the roof for itself. Still, thatch had its advantages. It was cheap, it was local, and when applied with skill, it could last over a decade, maybe two, if you didn't mind the occasional roof mushroom. The thatch also offered some insulation, keeping warmth inside during the cold months, and reflecting heat away in the summer. A nice idea. In theory, you reach up and touch the beam nearest to you. It's damp. Everything is damp. Rain seeps in through the imperfect seal of the roof, dripping softly into wooden bowls strategically placed on the floor. That drip, drip, drip becomes a kind of background music, joining the pops of the hearth and the grumbling of someone's stomach. Turf roofs were another option in colder regions. Imagine a garden growing on your ceiling. Packed earth, grass, even wildflowers, sprouting during warmer months. They looked beautiful and did a decent job of insulating, but they weighed as much as a small herd of sheep. Supporting that kind of load meant stronger beams and a lot of crossed fingers during storms. And then there's the use of dried dung. It's exactly what you think. Cow dung, flattened and dried, was sometimes layered into roof spaces or daubed between walls. It was cheap, insulating, and surprisingly effective at keeping drafts out. Also surprisingly effective at keeping guests out. But that's beside the point. Historians still debate how widespread these materials were, and whether choices reflected regional availability or just desperation. Some argue that dung insulation was considered perfectly normal and not disgusting by medieval standards. Others suggest it was a sign of poverty or temporary fixes in times of hardship. Either way, you're currently living under a roof that is about 20% poop by volume. As the wind picks up outside, you hear the low whistle of air threading through the gaps in the eaves. Cold seeps in like an invisible fog, kissing your ankles and creeping toward your knees. You wrap your cloak tighter and shuffle closer to the hearth, but the draft is relentless. To counter it, someone grabs a sack of straw and starts pressing it against the wall. Makeshift insulation. In wealthier homes, tapestries or thick woolen hangings would be draped along walls to block the wind. You don't have tapestries, but you do have old sacks and the creative energy of someone deeply motivated not to freeze. Later, you step outside for a moment, and that's when you notice something odd. The roofs seem to be smoking, not just your house, but all the nearby ones. It's the same smoky breath you saw earlier, but now it has a strange elegance, curling up from the thatch in lazy spirals. It's a familiar sight, strangely comforting, like seeing chimney trails without the chimneys. A fringe belief you hear whispers of is that smoke rising through the roof carries bad dreams with its sort of a reverse dream catcher. It's also said to keep away witches, though that might just be smoke-induced hallucinations. Either way, no one questions the odd designs or smoke stains. They're just part of the architecture of survival. You walk the perimeter of the house, trailing your hand along the outer wall, noticing how thick the mud daub is in some places and almost non-existent in others. It cracks under your fingers like dry cake. Repairs are constant. No one's ever done fixing a medieval home. The wind, rain, and smoke ensure that someone joins you outside, and you both glance up at the roof, watching a loose bit of thatch flutter like a lazy flag. You exchange a look, and without a word, go find a ladder and some straw. Maintenance waits for no one, especially not winter. As you climb and patch the roof again, you realize how precarious everything is. The fire must be fed, the walls must be sealed, the roof must be rebuilt, sometimes daily. There's no resting in a medieval house, not really. Only small moments of pause between the smoke, the wind, and the ever-challenging roof that may or may not fall in. Still, you grin as you tamp down the final bundle of straw and climb down. For all its faults, the roof held through the night. And that's a victory worth celebrating with a warm bowl of something thick and vaguely edible. And maybe a nap, if the rain holds off. You duck back inside, just as the wind picks up, nudging the door shut behind you with your hip. A small gust still manages to sneak in, rattling the poorly fitted wood like a mischievous ghost trying to gain entry. Inside, the air is a thick blend of old smoke, warm breath, and a faint hint of wet wool. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar, and most importantly, it's warmer than outside. As you stand there stomping the mud off your shoes, you become very aware of the walls, or more specifically, how poorly they're holding up in the fight against winter. These are thick stone or wattle and daub, construction solid, heavy, seemingly immovable, and yet somehow, the cold glides through them like a gossip through a village. Medieval stone walls were excellent for defense, terrible for thermal comfort. You could catapult a rock at one of these structures, and they'd shrug it off, but ask them to hold in heat. They'd laugh in thermal indifference. Stone retains cold like a grudge. It absorbs it during the night and shares it freely with you all day. You rest your hand against the interior wall. It's clammy, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your joints whisper threats, and it never truly goes away. Even in spring, the chill lingers deep in the stone. If the fire dies, the house doesn't just cool. It turns against you. Historians still argue about whether wall hangings were used more for decoration or insulation. In richer households, tapestry-lined walls were status symbols, but they also created a buffer against the icy embrace of lime-plastered stone. In your current peasant-grade accommodation, the wall decor consists of a hanging cloak, a bundle of herbs, and someone's laundry that's been frozen into shape. Windows. That's generous. More like holes. A medieval window is often just an open slot in the wall with a wooden shutter. Glass is expensive, rare, and definitely not in your budget. Some wealthier homes used horn or oiled parchment to create a translucent pane, emphasis on translucent, not transparent. It lets in light, sort of, but warmth, not a chance. As the wind whistles through those shutter gaps, you help someone stuff a cloth rag into the opening. Instant draft blocker. If you're fancy, maybe you've got a wooden board lined with moss or waxed linen for winter sealing, but most days, you rely on pure stubbornness and a blanket pinned over the hole. You plop down near a small wooden bench by the wall, wrapping yourself tighter in your cloak. Cold radiates up from the floor too, because insulation doesn't exist in the way modern folks understand it. Dirt floors are common, sometimes layered with straw or rushes. These are changed. Occasionally, the result: you get a mix of mud, hay, warmth, and mystery substances clinging to your soles. You wonder what it would be like to have a wooden floor, raised slightly off the ground. Some people those fancy manor folk did, but for now, you simply shift. A bit of rushes with your foot, trying to find a dry patch to your left. Someone mutters and shuffles their seat to a corner, where the wall meets the low ceiling. Warmer over here, they say. Not because of insulation, but because of geography. Heat rises in, then gets stuck in the upper part of the room, which is also where the smoke is. So you have to choose toastier air or clearer lungs. It's like a miserable game show with no prizes. There's a curious architectural detail. Above you, small wooden beams protruding slightly where two walls meet. You're told that placing certain herbs here keeps out evil and, more relevantly, bad weather. A fringe tradition from some regions suggests placing dried foxglove or nettles in the cracks to encourage warmth and health. Whether it works or not is beside the point. In a place this cold, every superstition starts to seem rational. Then you spot the mouse hole. Tiny, near invisible, but unmistakable. These walls, for all their thickness, are riddled with minute openings and passageways for creatures trying to escape the same cold you are. A rustle in the rushes confirms your suspicion. You're not the only tenant here. Mice, bugs, maybe the occasional bold stoat. You tap the wall lightly. It doesn't echo. That's good. Solid construction. But there's no denying it's a heat thief. You remember someone once tried to cover the interior in layered animal hides. Not for style, just for warmth. It didn't catch on. Too smelly, too heavy, and a bit too reminiscent of the previous owner. But hey, it blocked the wind. One scholarly debate centers on whether medieval builders understood thermodynamics, or were just making it up as they went along. Some say the layout of early homes' central fire, low ceilings, thick walls was the best they could manage without insulation materials. Others argue that much of it was tradition, stubbornly maintained, long after better ideas were available. Either way, you're still cold. By late afternoon, condensation begins to form on the inside of the walls. The heat from bodies and the hearth meets the chilled stone, and now the house is weeping. Little droplets run down the surface like the walls themselves are shivering. You drag a cloth across the damp streaks, then wring it out into a bucket. One more chore in a house that always demands more. Still, there's comfort here. Not warmth, exactly, but familiarity. You know which wall to lean against, where the worst drafts come from, which crack whistles like a flute when the wind hits. Just right. The house may be frigid, but it's also alive with creaks, sighs, and the soft rhythm of survival. You press your palm flat against the stone again, just for a moment. It's cold, but it's yours, and somehow, that helps. You're still wrapped in your cloak indoors because taking it off would be a declaration of war against your own body temperature. If you're not near the hearth, you're layered up like a human onion. And even if you are near the hearth, you're not exactly stripping down. In a medieval house, staying dressed wasn't just about modesty. It was about not freezing your marrow into icicles. So now we turn to the art of wearing everything you own at once. Let's start with the basics. Your underlayer is a linen shirt, coarse, scratchy, and always either too damp or too stiff. On top of that, you pull on a woolen tunic, then another one, then maybe a hooded cloak. You've also got leggings, wool socks if you're lucky, and a pair of foot traps made from leftover scraps if your socks have seen better centuries. And you sleep in all of it, because to remove layers in this house is to invite the Grim Reaper for tea. It might not surprise you to know that many people never changed clothes in winter, unless the outfit physically fell off them or burst into flames. And sometimes even then. The idea of nightwear didn't quite exist. You slept in what you wore all day or what you'd worn for 3 days straight. It wasn't laziness, it was strategy. Clothes were warmth, and every time you peeled them off, you risked losing that fragile bubble of retained heat. Removing your tunic at night was basically signing up for pneumonia with extra steps. The medieval rule of layering was simple: wear wool against the cold, linen against the skin, and if you're extra posh, fur against everything. Fur linings, squirrel, rabbit, or marten, were coveted. They kept in warmth and signaled a certain social class. But you've got wool, and you wear it proudly. If it's chilly, historians still argue over just how many layers the average peasant wore. Some records suggest 3 to 5 in deep winter, while others imply that clothing was simply rotated between drying and wearing. This makes sense when you realize that nothing ever really dries in a smoke-filled, drafty house. The best you can do is less damp. You notice your neighbor sitting stiffly on a stool, layers piled so high they resemble a medieval scarecrow. They move like a board, and when they reach for a cup, the rustle of fabric is almost comical. But they're warmish, function before fashion. There's also a clever little trick: wrapping fabric around joints, knees, wrists, elbows, anywhere the cold can sneak in. Strips of linen, or wool called garters and winningas, were wrapped like leg warmers, or arm braces, trapping warmth in and keeping joints mobile. A fringe belief held that if you wrapped your left elbow in red wool, it could protect your heart from the chill. There's no science behind it, but hey, cold hearts were a real concern. Back then, at least metaphorically. Even the head gets covered, and not just outdoors. Indoors, people wore coif-tight-fitting cloth caps often tied under the chin. These kept the warmth in, especially while sleeping. You chuckle as you watch someone settle into bed wearing a cap, 3 tunics, and boots. Yes, boots in bed. Medieval fashion. Always 2 steps from an Arctic expedition. You reach into your own garments and retrieve a warming stone flat, heated earlier in the hearth and wrapped in cloth. You tuck it against your ribs like a sleepy hedgehog. The heat bleeds into your body slowly, lovingly, until it fades. You'll do this again tomorrow, and the day after, until spring finally shows up like a reluctant guest. There's also the trick of layering within clothes. Some tunics were double-wrapped, or had flaps that folded across the chest. Tying these in place trapped warm air around the torso. It wasn't tailored, it wasn't stylish, but it was smart, and survival is always in style. You glance at your hands. They're red and rough, cracked from wind and constant use. Mittens existed but were rare. Most people used long sleeves as makeshift hand covers, pulling them down and wrapping them over fingers when needed. In some parts of Europe, leather muff sleeves were worn, essentially tubes that you shoved your hands into like a giant wearable burrito. You'd give anything for one right now, of course. Children didn't have as many layers. Smaller bodies, smaller wardrobes. Some toddlers ran around in long linen shirts, and little else at least indoors. They stayed warm by moving constantly and stealing your seat the second you stood up, because seats were usually near the hearth, and real estate that warm was more valuable than gold. Clothing wasn't just armor against the cold, it was a signal, a symbol of how well or poorly your household was doing. Wool dyed in bright colors meant extra coin. Natural tones meant practical priorities. You wore what you had, and if that meant a cloak passed down through 3 generations' moth holes, and all, then so be it. Each patch told a story. Each fray was a reminder. You've made it through another winter, and now you rise from your stool, limbs stiff from being swaddled like a medieval burrito. You shuffle across the floor with your warming stone, your 5th tunic, your 2 layers of socks, and a growing admiration for the simple brilliance of layering. No zippers, no thermal underwear, just wool, linen, and raw determination. You head toward your straw mattress, still fully dressed. You'll sleep like this, turn occasionally like a bundled log, and try not to roll over your hot stone, because tonight, your survival plan isn't the hearth or the thatch dot, it's you, and every inch of cloth you're wrapped in. You lie down still in all your layers, naturally on your straw mattress, which crinkles and shifts beneath you like a disapproving bag of hay. The night is deep now, the fire has dwindled to glowing coals, and the cold is slowly reclaiming the room like an unpaid landlord. But you've got a secret weapon. You're not trying to heat the room, you're only trying to heat the bed. This is the medieval approach to warmth, targeted, not total. Instead of heating an entire room, an exercise in futility, unless you live in a shoebox, people focused on heating themselves and the tiny area they'd be sleeping in. Bedrooms weren't necessarily warmer than the rest of the house. In fact, in many cases, they were colder. If you slept in a loft above the main room, sure, maybe the rising heat from the hearth added a few forgiving degrees, but if you were in a separate chamber, or unlucky enough to be in a detached outbuilding, forget it. So how did people manage? Well, for starters, bed warmers. These were pans usually made of brass or copper with long handles. You'd fill them with hot embers from the fire and slide them between the sheets to pre-warm your sleeping spot. Effective? Yes. Safe? Not particularly. You had to be careful not to scorch the bedding, or, worse, ignite the whole bed. But as long as you didn't fall asleep with one still in place, looking at you, guy who burned down half the hamlet, it worked. If you didn't have a metal warming pan, and let's face it, you probably didn't, you used heated stones or bricks. These were warmed in the hearth, then wrapped in cloth and tucked at the foot of the bed. They radiated heat slowly and safely, as long as no one kicked them in their sleep and yelped like a startled goat. Some families even had bed bricks. They passed down like heirlooms. Imagine inheriting a rock with a family name. Then there were bottle substitutes. Real hot water bottles wouldn't show up until the 16th century, but people found workarounds. Leather bladders filled with warm ale or broth, we're not judging, served the purpose. They were sealed and wrapped and held close, more comforting than you'd think. A fringe practice even included using heated bags of grain or dry beans, which gave off warmth and a surprisingly cozy smell, like toasted bread and survivable winters. Historians still argue over how widespread these techniques were. Some suggest warming beds was common only among the better off, while others point to mentions in peasant diaries and folklore about wrapping stones in cabbage leaves to soften the heat. Yes, cabbage leaves. Multi-purpose vegetables. Now, about bed sharing, again. In colder months, a warm bed was often a shared bed. Families, servants, guests, everyone got in like sardines in a wool-lined can. You didn't just share body heat. You shared breath. You shared dreams. You shared an increasingly pungent aroma of damp wool, smoked ham, and morning breath. It sounds unpleasant, and it was, but you wouldn't trade it for an empty, freezing bed. Even pets got in on the act. Cats and small dogs were welcomed under the covers, not for their companionship, though they did help morale, but because they were excellent foot warmers. You shift your legs now and feel the warm lump of the house dog curled beside your knees, breathing in slow, contented sniffles. You've named him Clove. He doesn't answer to it, but it makes you feel better. Sometimes. Beds themselves were designed with warmth in mind. In wealthier homes, there were box beds, small, enclosed sleeping compartments with sliding doors, or heavy curtains that trapped heat and body odor with equal vigor. These beds were like mini saunas for survivalists. In some cultures, particularly in colder parts of Europe, people even slept in built-in wall beds, carved into thick walls like wooden drawers. Pull-out human storage, practical and cozy, if mildly claustrophobic. But most medieval sleepers like you made do with a simple mattress stuffed with straw, maybe wool, if you were fortunate. It was placed low to the ground to avoid drafts, though some chose raised platforms if rodents were a problem. There were no fitted sheets or duvets. Blankets were made of heavy wool, often thick enough to bend your knees backward if stacked too high. You wiggle deeper into the scratchy folds of your blanket, pressing the warmed stone closer to your chest. The fire's last glow barely reaches you now. That's fine. You don't need it anymore. Your bed is your cocoon, your personal furnace. Some believed that tucking herbs under the bed or within the blankets helped keep the cold and spirits away. Lavender, rosemary, mugwort. One old superstition claimed that dried thistle beneath the mattress would trick the chill into retreat. You have no idea what that means, but there's a small bundle of rosemary under your pillow anyway. Can't hurt, might smell nice. You close your eyes. Somewhere across the room, someone coughs. Another sighs in their sleep. The air is cold, but under the blanket, under your layers, next to your snoring dog and warm brick, you are safe. And that, really, was the whole point. Not heating the house, heating the experience of sleep. Not comfort, exactly, but containment. Survival, a night you could get through. Maybe even enjoy, if the dog didn't kick you in the ribs again. The wind moans softly outside, but inside, your body is wrapped in warmth from within and without. No fireplace, no thermostat, just knowledge, passed down through generations, and a shared belief. If the bed is warm, then the night is not so cruel. You wake up to a familiar sting in your throat, and a nose that feels like it's been coated in fine ash. Welcome to the medieval morning, where your lungs double as a chimney sweep. The fire has long since gone out, but the air in the room is still thick with the ghosts of yesterday's smoke. You sit up and cough just once, just enough to clear the fog in your chest, and watch as a faint puff escapes your mouth. It's warmer under the blanket. Out here, it's the Ice Age again. And now, let's talk about the ever-present smoke. In this house, there is no chimney, just a crude hole in the roof, barely a suggestion of ventilation. Maybe a few tiles are missing, or a wooden flap has been pushed open by last night's wind. But the smoke doesn't care. It lingers. It owns the upper half of the room. It curls through the rafters, turns the walls a permanent shade of grief, and has tattooed your clothes with the scent of 1,000 forgotten soups. You shuffle toward the hearth, but there's no glow, just gray ash and the faintest memory of fire. Someone tosses on a few twigs and begins the ritual. Flint, steel, a lot of muttering. Smoke begins to rise almost instantly, thick and acrid. No flue, no vent, just open air, open lungs, and a strong commitment to getting slightly warmer and significantly more congested. Historians still debate whether medieval folks were truly accustomed to breathing in so much smoke, or if they simply suffered in silence. There are accounts of persistent coughing, eye irritation, even early mentions of lung rot, a charming phrase for what we now suspect were chronic respiratory issues. Children raised in homes without chimneys likely had lungs that doubled as kindling. But here's the twist. Smoke had benefits too. Yes, really. For one, it cured the timber in the roof. Constant smoke exposure hardened the wood, helping prevent rot and infestations. That blackened ceiling wasn't just ugly, it was practical. The smoke coated everything in a thin film that repelled pests like lice, fleas, and beetles. So while you coughed through dinner, at least you weren't scratching through it. There's also the belief, still whispered in some regions, that smoke warded off evil spirits, particularly those that crept in during the night, when your soul was most exposed. Old superstitions claimed that a smoky house was a guarded house, its rafters blessed with a permanent haze of protection. One fringe story tells of a family who refused to ever install a chimney because they believed the smoke had trapped a spirit in the roof that kept their crops from failing. You're not sure if that's genius or just a prolonged carbon monoxide poisoning situation, but hey, the crops did fine. Another odd benefit: bedbug prevention. Not eradication, mind you, just deterrence. The smoke's pungency seeped into every crevice, creating an environment that discouraged all but the most determined vermin. That said, you still feel something bite your ankle in bed sometimes. So clearly not all the bugs got the memo. You look up toward the rafters, where centuries of soot have gathered into something resembling a second roof. It sways slightly when the wind pushes through the smoke hole. There's a strange beauty to it, dark layers of history baked into wood and straw. Each one a memory of a winter survived. A cat slinks along the beam, its fur permanently tinted with ash. It yawns, stretches, and curls near a hanging bundle of herbs. Those aren't just decorations. Bundles of dried rosemary, lavender, or mugwort are tied to the beams, sometimes with bits of cloth or feather. Supposedly, these absorb some of the smell and soothe the smoke spirits. Whether they work or not is irrelevant. They're part of the culture, part of the routine. You sit by the hearth again and sip from a wooden cup of weak ale or barely warm broth, something warm enough to chase away the chill in your chest. You can still taste the smoke in your food, in your clothes, in your dreams. In fact, medieval people expected their food to taste slightly smoky. It wasn't a flavor, it was a lifestyle. A traveling friar once wrote that his favorite homes were the ones whose roof wept black tears in the morning. You feel that. Every beam in this place drips with the memory of fire. And still, the house stands. Still, it shelters. Still, it smokes. Someone opens the door, letting in a rush of clean, icy air. The contrast is jarring. Your eyes water not from the smoke, but from the sudden freshness. You'd forgotten what unpolluted air felt like. You stand and take a step toward the door. Just one, just to feel it. Your lungs widen in surprise, then contract in protest. They miss the smoke already, and now the hearth is crackling again. Someone's poked it into reluctant life. A pot hangs above it, filled with something thick and brown and hopefully edible. The smoke is back, like an old friend who never left. You sigh, tie a cloth around your nose, and return to your place on the bench, because this is life in a house without a chimney. Every breath is a compromise, every cough is expected, but every night ends warm, and every morning begins again with soot in your hair and fire in your throat, and somehow, it's enough. You're sweeping ashes from the hearth now, using a crude bundle of twigs tied with strings, the medieval broom. Dust floats into the air like sleepy ghosts, settling on everything, including the bread that was cooling nearby. You dust it off, with the same hand you used to stir the fire, because hygiene standards in a smoke-cured house are more about survival than sparkle. But today, there's something different in the air, not just soot and steam. There's talk of new ideas, some strange heat tricks. So while the fire sputters and the cold breathes through the shutters, someone leans in and says, "Did you hear what they're doing in the next village?" You raise an eyebrow and settle closer, and so begins a tour of medieval heat hacks and folklore fixes, some practical, some questionable, all born from necessity and frostbitten toes. First up, herbal insulation. You've already seen bundles of herbs hanging from rafters, supposedly to sweeten the smoky air. But in some households, herbs were stuffed into the walls and gaps, cracks, anywhere a draft might sneak in. Sage and rue were common picks, thought to ward off spirits and sickness alike. Lavender served as nature's air freshener and mild insect repellent. Whether or not they kept you warmer is still up for debate, but they gave the place a certain rustic charm, a smoky, spicy charm. Then there's the reed mat trick. A thin, pliable reed mat or woven rushes would be laid flat against the interior wall, creating a thin air buffer that trapped some of the warmth. Think of it like medieval wallpaper, but made from your floor. It didn't revolutionize heat retention, but it kept you from leaning directly against cold stone and contemplating the futility of existence. A more bizarre method, the heated pet rock theory. No, not a joke. Some believed that certain stones, especially ones found near rivers or struck by lightning, held residual warmth longer than others. These blessed stones were placed near beds, in shoes, even inside sleeves. Historians still argue whether this was early geological understanding or just one village convincing another to sleep with pocket gravel. You're told of floor vents, small, intentional gaps in the wooden floors of wealthier homes built above animal stalls. As the animals exhaled and lived and, well, existed below, their body heat would rise through the floorboards, warming the family above. Genius, maybe? Aromatic? Definitely. Some called it barn draft. Others just called it normal. There's also mention of bed curtains, rigged with bells not for decoration, but to jangle if anyone got up during the night and let in cold air. It sounds excessive, but in a world where preserving heat was a battle, even a draft from someone's midnight trip to the chamber pot could spark a family argument. You make your way to the bed and examine the edges of the mattress. Someone has tucked hot coals, actual live coals, into small clay pots placed near the base of the bed, surrounded by bricks for safety. They radiate low warmth for hours. The pots are cracked from years of use, scorched black and soft at the base, but they still work. Risky? Sure, but so was winter itself. There's even a whispered tale about an old farmer who trained his sheep to lie on specific parts of the floor to generate symmetrical warmth in the room. You're not sure if you believe it, but you do wonder if the animals are smarter than they look. Another fringe idea circulating is the salt line theory. Some believed that drawing a line of salt around the hearth or doorway helped trap the heat inside, like a magical thermal boundary. Others say it was to keep spirits out, or rats in, or children in bed. Medieval logic is often a tapestry of beliefs, practicality, and wishful thinking stitched together with folklore and half-remembered Latin. You glance toward the fire again. A heavy iron pot is suspended over the coals, not for food this time, but for steam heating. A bit of water, a few herbs, rosemary, thyme, maybe mint, and suddenly you've got humidified air with a medicinal twist. Your nose clears. Your lungs thank you. It doesn't warm the room, exactly, but it warms you. And that's enough. Not every trick worked, of course. Some made things worse. One family decided to insulate their walls with wet moss. Turns out it grew mold faster than it grew warmth. Another tried to burn dried dung in an upstairs loft to heat the space below. That ended in smoke, argument, and at least one pig permanently banned from upper floors. Still, necessity is the ultimate inventor. From firestones to herbal insulation, people kept trying. They didn't have insulation foam, or radiators, or draft-proof windows. What they had was ingenuity, and the kind of stubborn hope only people who have never known central heating can possess. You sit again by the hearth, wrapping a rough wool shawl around your shoulders. Someone nearby is carefully sewing scraps of wool into a sleeve warmer too, mismatched sleeves stitched together to trap warmth around the arms. Another is fashioning a hand warmer out of an old boot and a hot stone. Innovation looks a little strange here, but it works, and now you feel it. That rarest of sensations in a medieval home, a room that's almost cozy. Smoke curls lazily, not choking. The dog is snoring. Your feet are wrapped in 3 layers. Your back is against a reed mat, and your face is warm from the herbal steam pot. The fire glows. The cold knocks, but it's not getting in tonight. And that, perhaps, is the real magic. Not a perfect method, but a dozen imperfect ones stacked together. Some science, some folklore, and a whole lot of trying, anyway. The wind has settled. For the first time all day, the shutters stop creaking, and the air outside quiets into the kind of stillness that feels like a held breath. You stay seated near the hearth, watching the glow of coals that pulse like the last heartbeat of a dragon. The room is dim, smoky, and entirely ordinary, but something's changing. A shift, soft and slow, like the season itself. And it's coming from the roof. Word has reached your little village filtered through gossip, travelers, and a merchant with suspiciously clean boots, that in some towns, people have started installing chimneys. Not just a hole in the roof, or a wooden vent hood. A real stone and mortar chimney that pulls smoke up and out of the house with ... efficiency. It sounds ridiculous, almost dangerous. A tower in your roof that removes all the smoke. Won't that let the heat escape too? You hear conflicting rumors. Some say it's only the rich doing it. Others say it's sweeping the towns like wildfire, which is ironic, since the chimney was supposed to prevent house fires. Either way, something is changing in the way people stay warm. Chimneys, for what it's worth, have existed in certain areas since at least the 12th century. But they were rare, expensive, and mostly seen in monasteries or castles, where architectural experiments didn't lead to total ruin. Historians still argue whether the invention spread from Italy, France, or even earlier Roman designs, rediscovered. In ruined villas, wherever they came from, chimneys were slow to catch on. People mistrusted them. Open fires inside walls. What if the house caught fire? What if spirits used it as a door? But in this moment, sitting in your small, smoky home, chimney talk is buzzing, and for good reason. The house stinks. Your clothes stink. Your eyes stink. The roof is probably carcinogenic at this point, and you begin to wonder, what would it be like to breathe without coughing first? A chimney changes everything. It means a hearth against the wall, not in the center of the room. That alters the entire layout of the home. No more tripping over fire in the dark. No more weaving your way around the communal smoke pit just to refill your cup. Suddenly, there's more space, more cleanliness, more control. It also means something else: class distinction. Chimneys aren't just practical, they're expensive. Stone, labor, and architectural know-how all cost coin, and coin is scarce. So at first, only the upper class gets them. The manor houses, the clergy, the burghers. Their homes become cleaner, brighter, and safer. And that difference starts to matter. You notice it one day when you visit a nearby town. You step inside someone's house, a modest merchant, nothing grand, and your mouth opens in surprise. The air is clear. You can see all the way across the room. You're not coughing. There's no cat coughing, either. The fire is neatly nestled into a fireplace, and above it rises a tall, narrow shaft of smooth stone. A chimney. You feel both envy and confusion. Is this the future, or a passing luxury? People back home aren't so sure. Some claim chimneys make you too soft, that breathing smoke builds strong lungs. Others say smoke keeps pests and spirits away. Without it, the house becomes vulnerable. Vulnerable to rot, yes, but maybe even to witches. A fringe belief suggests that chimneys give witches an entrance they never had before. As if your drafty walls weren't already rolling out the red carpet. Still, little by little, chimneys creep in. The village carpenter tries building one out of wood and clay. It smokes like a drunk dragon and collapses in the first rain. Then the blacksmith tries his hand, more durable, but too narrow. Eventually, a mason comes from the nearby abbey and shows the proper technique: layered stone, sloped flue, a proper cap to stop the wind from shoving the smoke back down your throat, and finally, one day, you see it, rising above a neighbor's roof like a proud stone neck, the village's first real chimney. The air inside that house clears. The walls stay cleaner. The family coughs less. You visit skeptical. But the moment you step in and inhale deeply without blinking tears, you understand the chimney doesn't just change how people heat their homes. It changes how people live inside them. Cooking becomes easier. Furniture arrangements change. Ceilings no longer need to be black with soot. Even sleeping patterns shift: less coughing, better breathing, deeper sleep. Children grow up without lungs that sound like bellows. Eventually, You save enough to build one of your own. It takes months. The stones are uneven. The draft is fickle, but it works. And the first morning you wake up and don't taste charcoal on your tongue, it feels like magic. Like waking in a different century. The hearth is now nestled into a tidy fireplace. A cat sleeps on the ledge, soot-free. A pot simmers. The air is breathable. The warmth is still here only now. It doesn't come at the cost of vision or breath. The old ways linger for a while. People still use heated stones, wool layers, and sleep in groups when it's especially cold. But the chimney becomes the line between then and now. A symbol of progress, of comfort, of air you don't have to fight with. And so, as the snow dusts your thatch and your new chimney puffs smoke into the soft winter sky, you lean back in your chair and think, warmth is no longer a battle, it's home. The fire burns low now, just embers glowing beneath a crust of ash. Outside, the wind sighs across the fields, quieter than before, its breath softened by snow. The shutters hold steady. The roof doesn't creak. The walls, for once, feel like they're holding the warmth in rather than letting it slip away. You're lying in your bed, cloaked in wool, stone tucked at your feet, layers wrapped around you like stories. The room is dark but not heavy. Smoke no longer clings to every surface. The air smells faintly of rosemary and old wood. You let your eyes close, feeling the pulse of heat in your fingers, in your chest, in the slow rhythm of your breath. Behind your eyelids, you see the long arc of change smoke holes and straw, bundled cloaks and warming bricks. And now, chimneys, rising from rooftops like promises. Generations kept the cold at bay with whatever they had, blankets, animals, stories, and now you lie here, surrounded by their echoes. The past lingers gently, not with discomfort, but with memory. You can still feel the rushes underfoot, the first coughs of morning, the weight of winter pressing on the door. But tonight, they're distant, gentle, part of the rhythm that's rocked so many to sleep before you. So let the fire dim, let the coals sigh, let the wind whisper its old songs against the walls. You're warm, you're safe, and for now, you rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.